Hello, everyone. Good evening. How's it going? Happy Wednesday. Can you hear me all right? Is it all good? I feel blotchy, scratchy, and splotchy, so I is ready. Someone read the title. Hello. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Yes, tonight we're doing like we did a couple of weeks ago with how to come up with contrast plus recipes. We're doing another kind of theory-based technique-based stream is what we're doing today. So we're going to be talking about basically like how to avoid contrast splotches, blotches, and scratches. We're also going to take you through how contrast paints actually work, and we're going to do it in a really boring way. We're also going to record this, and I will put this out as a video after the fact, edited down again, just like we did last time we did one of these. As you may have seen, the video yesterday that came out was the video from that stream a couple of weeks ago, just tightened up a little bit, and I added some red circles for everybody to see. How boring. Oh, very, very, very boring, but in a really interesting way. Tattooed Zoologist, thank you very much for one gifted Warhipster membership. You are an absolute legend. I really appreciate that. That is our first of the day. Red circles and pictures, exactly. Good afternoon / evening all. Continuing to live vicariously through you all as all my hobby stuff is in storage while waiting for our new place to be ready. I'm excited for you, Diedrich. I want a new place. Hello, buddy. Hope you're having a better day than mine. Currently sitting with no power and have been for the last 4 hours. I want to paint. I know how that feels, Stoogie. I'm having a pretty good day. I have a massive headache, but the show must go on. So, hopefully my headache disappears throughout the course of this stream. One can only hope. Right, we need to make sure we don't have a... Okay. I found an old notebook, which is what I need for tonight. And I just looking through it and I was like, some of this might be data protected. Definitely can't have that appear on stream. So we just have to be careful about what page we have. Nico S, thank you very much for becoming a member. That is very kind of you. Thank you very much. That puts us on 444. Did you see the latest contrast content from GW? Inverse Fire Dragon tutorial. No, I haven't seen that. What, yellow with an orange head rather than orange with a yellow head? Is that how it is? Still painting Crondis using your guide. It's day 3 and about to get to highlighting. That sounds awesome. Super awesome coffee. Just like your name. Super awesome. Keep Story, thank you very much for being a member for 8 months. I'm glad this subject came up because I had a difficult time painting a Riptide the other day with the Ugandan Yellow and Fire Slayer Flesh. That's good. Well, it's not good. I'm sorry that you had a problem with that. Hopefully tonight we can help you figure out some things when it comes to this sort of thing. So I just need to check. You're seeing behind the curtain, as it were. Let's just see what that looks like. Doesn't quite look bright enough, does it? So we might have to just bump the exposure up by a little bit. How's that? Oh, that looks perfect. It's really bumped. Okay. All right. Alright. Are you guys ready? Does anybody have any questions before we get started? because we're filming this, but we're filming it properly. We're not just hitting the film button and just whatever going on. Something I just have to sort of just slightly adjust off screen as well. We can't have that appearing. Oh. Asher Van Dale, thank you very much for the absolute massive $50 super chat. Hi, I've been using your Grey Knights videos to paint my first army. For the big Dread Knight sword, I want to use Luxion purple instead of Talisar blue. What colours should I be using for the lighter detail work if I want to stay with the purples? Thanks, Asher Van Dale. That is incredibly generous of you. I very much appreciate that. I actually have a tutorial that you might find very interesting that uses a purple power blade that I think would be perfect for it. And essentially the colours are the same as what I would do if I wanted to do it purple. And the video I am of course talking about is this one right here. Contrast Plus, how to paint Baharoth, Cry of the Wind. Because in this video there's an advert playing. In this video we use Luxion purple. That is exactly it, to get the blended power sword basically. And we use a variation of a thinned version of it over the top of something like, it's Drukhari, not Drukhari Violet, Druki Violet is what I think we put down first, if I remember rightly. And then we use a blend of various thinned down Luxion purple and Lamia medium mixes to get there. So that video might help you significantly in how to paint it. I've already got an example. What paints are on your hand? Silver, pink, black, gold, blue. I hope that video helps you. But yeah, Drukhari Violet. Druki Violet is your base. That's your brightest colour. And then Luxion Purple, thinned down with 3 parts medium to 1 part Luxion Purple. And then just do it a couple of times. And you'll get to Luxion Purple, is how I would do it. And I don't think you need to go much darker, because once you do a couple of layers of Luxion Purple, it starts to get quite dark, which is quite nice. I hope that's useful. Anyway, I need to pause some music, because it's too loud, and we're going to be recording this, as mentioned. So we're also going to minimize this stuff here for the sake of the video. I'm toying with painting my EC like Van Halen's guitar. Will it be torture? Yes. Will it look amazing? Yes. And I agree. Yes. All of those. Right. Are we ready? What's the best with Achillean green? I've used it as an edge. Highlight like you did on Drazar. What do you mean? What's the best highlight colour for Achillean green? Because I would generally say Temple Guard blue or the next one up. What is it? Baharoth blue works really nicely with Achillean green. Anyway. Drop what you mean, Keith, and we'll film the first part of this video. We'll do that now. So, today, what are we talking about? We are talking about how to avoid contrast splotches, blotches, and scratches. I think this is the most asked question in general of contrast paint, and I think it's probably good to reiterate this every so often as to how the best way to avoid those things happening goes down. And there's a number of different things to talk about in terms of being able to get a nice smooth coat. But one of those things that we need to understand first is what actually is contrast paint and how does it work. And well, I bought some stationery to demonstrate these things and to explain it. And this will go a long way to explaining why you might be getting blotches and splotches. Less so scratches. Scratches don't generally tend to happen unless, well, they tend to happen if you're using the contrast paint in a certain way, but we'll get to that in just a minute. The blotches and splotches, though, yeah, needs to be a little bit of an explanation as to how contrast paint actually works. So in order to do that, we're going to basically talk about the theory of why it works the way it works, or at least how I understand how it works the way it works. And that will go some way as to kind of demonstrating as to why you might be getting some of these things happening to your miniatures when you are trying to use contrast paint. So there we go. So that ought to do. Okay. So generally contrast paint works because it's translucent. It's see-through. And what it does is it creates a reflection of what's underneath it in order to give you the final colour. Which is why when you use Grey Seer, Wraithbone, White Scar, all these kinds of things, those are the recommended primers for the colours to look as neutral as they do. If you want it to look red or green or blue or black or pink, whatever, over the top of those neutral primers, it will look like those colours, or at least how it's intended to look. If you apply it over the top of a darker primer, for example, Mechanica Standard Grey, or you apply this over the top of Chaos Black even, what you'll end up getting is basically like a green version of Mechanica Standard Grey. So when you apply Blood Angels Red over the top of Chaos Black, what you get is a red-black. You don't get red. It's not like a base or layer paint, which is opaque in nature and is designed to be built up in many layers to create a sheen of that colour, basically like a barrier between your eye and the black undercoat, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So when you're using things like base and layer paints, you will often be told, just don't worry about being too neat, just go for it, just layer it up, do multiple thin coats in order to get it to that colour, and you invariably will eventually once you've done so. Contrast paint, it is not the same thing. These paints are not created equal. They just act in completely different ways, and one of the best ways to demonstrate this is using a pen. And this is a very specific type of pen. So we're going to go overhead here. And as you can see, I've written a lovely message to all of you folks at home, and especially my live chat who are watching right now. Hello, live chat. If you're not here live, wave to live chat. They're amazing, and you're amazing for watching too. Anyway, hello everyone. It's the Warhipster here. Love you, chat. It's just like one of my videos. So the reason we've got pens and paper out first is because this is a really good way of demonstrating how contrast paint works, okay? Now, these are what is known as highlighter pens in the UK. I don't know what they're called where you are locally. I've seen fluorescent pens. I've seen fluorescent markers. I've seen magic markers, this, that, and the other. Eventually, you use these to create notes or to highlight sections of text, generally. So, for example, if you've been at school... That seems a weird thing. When I was at school, we would be given passages of text and highlight the bits that we thought were interesting using things like a highlighter pen. And, well, here's how they work. We've written, hello everyone, it's the Warhipster here. Love you, chat. Well, we just want to highlight chat, so we're just going to use our highlighter pen over the top of it, like that. There you go. And as you can see, it's see-through, and it, well, it's see-through, so you can still see the chat underneath. There's an interesting thing that's happened here in that I've used kind of, I've used a sort of I've used proper ink rather than a biro to highlight this, so there's a bit of mixing that's gone on there, which also, incidentally, one of the reasons you might be getting splotches with your contrast paint is that your undercoat isn't fully dry, or indeed the paint underneath it's not fully dry. It's a very good example. But there you go. As you can see, this has gone over the top of that text, and you can see the text is still there, we just have a colour over the top. Now, when you are applying your contrast paints, this is where the reason why we have these pens. Here is a green one, for example, and if we apply a second contrast paint over the top of our first contrast paint, or in terms of a highlighter pen over the top of our previous highlighter pen, this is going to be a reflection of what's underneath it. So this is a green one over the top of that. Boom. There you go. So you can see around here, around this top edge here, right? So you see this? There is a line right there where this has changed colour now. So the green has gone over the top of the orange, so this is now a different colour. This is not just a straight green that's still doing the same thing. This is green reflecting the orange and reflecting the black that's underneath it. This is how contrast paint works, and helpfully these have also done exactly what I was hoping to do. You can see we've got a little bit of a blob at the end of this here. Now, when you are applying your contrast paints, as an example, right? Like, say we want to just colour in a piece of this paper right here. We're just going to apply like that, and you see at the end here we have a blob, and at the end here we have a blob as well. This is because of the contact that it's spent with the brush, but the pen is spent with the paper, and it's then dragged this out across. But you know, it's not a completely 100% accurate analogy, but this is really good for what we're talking about. So you can see here we've got this one line. Now if we just wait for it just for a moment, and I'll just run my finger over it, feels dry to me. If I go over it again, we're going to get a doubling up effect, right? And we'll go past it a little bit. You see how that's doubled up in terms of the intensity of the colour. Let's go over it a third time, and we'll start over here. See how it triples up now? And we'll do it a fourth time. You can see where it's all beginning here. Bosh, 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 bosh. And, well, there you go. This is how contrast paint works. So when you're applying it, a lot of what your blotches and splotches and things that can happen, it's because this is happening. It's because you're doubling up the layer of contrast paint, because you're either going too slow or it's drying as it's going on, basically. Similarly, this is another thing that's interesting, and contrast paint works very, very similarly. If I take this pen and just hold it on the paper for like that for just a minute, the ink is starting to flow through the nib into the paper. As you can see, it starts to spread. You see? It starts to spread out and get darker and darker and darker. And you'll see it's done that. And the same thing happens with contrast paint. If you have too much contact with the paper, or in this case the miniature, with your contrast paint and brush, and you're just on the model like that, you're going to start getting larger and darker spots, and it will just flow between the pen, or in this case your brush, and onto the model like that kind of thing. Whereas if you just touch it, there you go. Just a small little, there we go. Makes sense. Now similarly, again with contrast paint, if we're colouring in, if we go quick enough like that, you're still going to see a little bit of tide marks, which is why it's not 100% a great analogy, but you see how it's much more consistent, right? It's almost the same colour all the way through. Whereas if I now go back over it in the same, it's going to accentuate the tide marks. And if I do that again, and go back over it like that, and go back like this, and go back like this, and go back like this, and keep going, and keep going, and keep going, and keep going. You see? See how it's just getting darker and wetter in the middle here, and you've got kind of all of this brush marking going on around the outside. Now these pens are designed to dry very quickly. They're not designed to dry immediately. They're just designed to dry really quickly. But this is what your contrast paint is doing, right? This is how it works, okay? I hope this all makes sense. I really hope this all makes sense. If I then just come in with some of that orange as well over the top, you'll see what I mean. There you go. See how you got different colours going on? In some cases, It's like it's here, it's where you want it to be, but in here it's not what you want, and this, that, and the other, and so on and so forth. So this is basically how contrast paint works. This is why we needed to talk about this first. Now, the reason why contrast paint being a reflection of what's underneath it is important to mention is that, well, if you have a slightly inconsistent primer or an inconsistent base coat or something like that, say you've retooled up a piece of your model with some grey cere or something, and it's not 100% blocked in grey cere, for example, then it's going to look splotchy. It is, because it's a reflection of what is underneath it. That is just the way it is. So that's one thing to just kind of bear in mind, based on just the theory of how these contrast paints work. Similarly, if you've got a kind of like a piece of dust or a bit of hair or something, or a little bit of just, you know, dirt, or a blob of paint from somewhere else, or a splat from just from other paint, for example, that will also be reflected in the final when you apply the contrast paint over the top, because again, it's only as good as what's underneath it, and that's the most important part. How was that, everybody, for the first part? Is that okay? Are you still with me, everybody? Everybody out there still with me? Still enjoying it? Finding it useful? Finding it interesting? Or are you just like, don't teach us to suck eggs? Bored, says Forge Father. I think we need an air horn to blast in. No! It's wonderful information taught in a way that makes sense outside of painting. Brilliant. Excellent. That's just what I wanted. That's what I like to hear. Okay. What was the next part? The next part is the brush control. I have remembered. Don't worry. Okay. Chat, what colour should I do this with? What colour should I use this with? We're going to do a demonstration on the brush control element of avoiding it. Blood Angel's red, mud brown. Well, mud brown is not a contrast paint. Hexwraith, just kidding. Oh god, so many questions. So many colours. Let's go with something horrid. Dark Angel's green. We'll get to Dark Angel's green. Don't worry. This is a multifaceted video. We'll do Blood Angel's red. I've seen that come up the most. Okay. We'll do Blood Angel's red, because Blood Angel's red is lovely. Do we think that this is adequate? Maybe we just zoom in just a tad. Like that. Get rid of the eyelash. Make a wish. Okay. Just the microphone. Okay. So enough mucking about with pens. Let's actually put this into practice with some paint, shall we? And we're going to use Blood Angel's red to begin with, but don't worry, we're going to get to a bunch of different things, and there's a couple of models that we're going to be working on as well. So let's just bear this in mind, okay? So we're going to use Blood Angels Red with a medium layer brush, and we're going to talk about what we just kind of talked about, okay? So if we just make a blob of Blood Angels Red right there, as you can see, it's blobbed out in such a way where we have a darker patch here and here, slightly lighter patch because we've just pressed it on. If we just take another whole brush load and we touch the brush to the paint pad, we'll see it just start to seep out along the brush bristles. That's the word I'm looking for. There we go. And as you can see, there is a reflection there of what our brush was just doing. Okay, so the thickest part of the brush where there's the most paint is in the middle where it's dark, and we've got a brighter bit around the outside where there's less paint based on how we've just touched it onto the palette there. And again, if we just do a brush stroke like this, as you can see, same thing. The most paint started over here and it got lighter as we came all the way out, just like we did with the highlighters. The only difference between the highlighter pens and this is that it doesn't leave a dark thing at the end because we've run out of paint at that point. If we had a main line of paint into the top of our brush, you would see the exact same principle of that happening here on the palette. So, how do we avoid this kind of thing? Well, there's a couple of things to bear in mind about your brush and in terms of controlling how much paint you have on your brush. So, one of the reasons you might be getting a blobby finish is because you have way too much paint on your brush. And way too much paint on your brush basically looks like what happens when your brush is starting to form a drip. Now, if we load up our brush with too much paint, what we'll see, if I can just get it to focus, there we go. Oh, that'll do. So you see how the brush has almost formed basically a triangle from the ferrule. It's really splayed out now. If I was to hold this for long enough, you would start to see a sort of drip start to form at the end of the brush tip. Now, this is what's known as having way too much paint on your brush, because as demonstrated down here, you see where all that dark paint is in the middle and there as well. If we just kind of take our hand away, there we go. So you see that dark paint in the middle there, dark paint in the middle there. That's where the heaviest concentration of the heaviest pigment on the brush has come. And again, if I just show you on here, there you go. You see how it's really splayed out. And if we now try and apply this to the palette paper just down here, well, what we'll get is that kind of mess. You see how it's really dark over here and really light over here? We've had to get rid of some of that heavy pigment, which is where it's all flowed out of the brush. Now if I just wash the brush, and sometimes you'll see people will give you the advice to just now go in and just absorb that paint and move it around. However, that's going to start creating tide marks in what you've just done, as you can see. So you have to be really, really gentle and just kind of really kind of, I think for this technique to work, you have to know exactly how much paint to have on your brush to overpaint a section of a model in order to not be left behind with this kind of finish, you see. And we can keep going and trying to move it and absorbing the paint, or indeed we can get a fully clean brush and just put the brush in like this to try and absorb the paint. But again, look how much we've just kind of taken off. See how we've just created a real big hole in it. I don't think that that looks particularly nice, and I think that that's a little bit too advanced of a way to paint with the contrast paint. Obviously, things change when you're not just painting on a completely flat surface like this, but because you can then kind of move this into recesses and stuff without kind of taking it off, which we will kind of talk about a little bit later when we've got a model in front of us. But that is what happens when you have too much paint, and we've done our best to rescue this. You see, it looks fairly consistent around here, but you've still got that kind of patchy stuff that's going on, and this kind of looks a little bit like a I feel like we're slowly drawing a screaming ghost. That was not on purpose. Anyway, so this is where kind of the super blobbiness comes from, is that you've got too much paint on your brush. Now, the thing that's rarest that happens with contrast paint is when you get scratches, you get scratchy finish. And, well, the scratchy finish happens because the paint is basically dried out on your brush. It's dried out on your brush because you haven't got enough. So if I take a little bit of paint on my brush and then just get rid of most of it to the point of where it's like this. You see? There's barely any. You can see it's just about a little bit of red on there. Right? And we've left it long enough now. It should be a little bit dry. If I now try and apply this, see how it's really weak? And it's fuzzy. There you go. And it's fuzzy around the edges. There you go. This is what happens when you don't have enough on your brush. And if you've ever experienced this, it's almost definitely because of that. And basically what's happening here is that the paint has dried out. And you'll see now. See how splayed out my brush is? What you're then painting with is hundreds or dozens of different little tiny single hair or like 3 or 4 hair brushes that are still depositing some of what's left of the wet paint. And that's why you're getting that happening. There you go. Like that sort of thing. See? It's rare. This is the rarest thing that happens. But that's why that's happening. That's where you're having it's too much. It's not enough paint, basically. And so here comes to another blotchiness section. And well, for this we need to do a bit of paper folding, basically. So if I turn this to one side, and we're just going to create a little kind of little fold in the paper. Now what you'll notice sometimes with painting, with contrast paint, is that when you're painting with a model, right? Let's say you've got a cloak, for example. Got a nice fold in the cloak here. And you're applying your contrast paint and it's all coming down like this and it's looking lovely. And then you look back at the model a couple of minutes later and, well, a lot of it might have collected at the bottom, or it's gone all kind of weird and strange at the bottom on various places. Like the paint might have pulled back a little bit, and like it's gone a little bit patchy here, but it's really dark in here. Well, the reason for that is gravity. And there's not a whole lot you can do about gravity other than just be careful with how much paint you have on your brush. So if I take this big old brush full of Blood Angels Red, and I'm going to apply this over my cloak. So I'm going to start up here and do that kind of thing. What you'll eventually notice, after a while, it will start to dry. And all of this dark pigment will start running towards the bottom of the model, to the point of where it starts to form drips down here. You can see it's already getting a lot darker and it's losing a lot of its power up here. Now this goes for any model, because your models stand upright. Your models stand on their 2 feet or 4 feet or 5 feet or 6 feet or how or no feet. They stand upright, and you're leaving your model like this, and eventually the paint is just going to start dripping down. This is another symptom of having too much paint. If I just do a big blob of Blood Angels Red like that, it will not kind of go outside of its area where it's been applied, but you can start to see it. Heavy pigment is all running towards the bottom there. You can see right down there. See how much of that paint has gone towards the bottom? You can see how it's kind of almost created some texture which we don't want. So if I now pull it out, see that drip? See that big drip right there? Gravity will affect you, my friends. It will cause blotches. It will start the runoff, which you don't want it to do. And this is a symptom of there being way too much paint on your brush. So, the question I can hear you all clamoring to ask is, how much is the right amount of paint? And, well, this is going to be slightly tricky to demonstrate on a flat piece of white paper, but the amount of paint that you should have on your brush is that your brush is full, but it's not dripping. And I'll explain what that looks like. So we're just going to load up our brush here, and now that right there is the optimum amount of paint. You see how it's not really splaying out like we did before? So when we had too much paint on our brush, it looked like that. That's really drippy. If I just touch this off in the lid of my contrast paint pot, we want it to be straight down like this. And that is the optimum amount of paint for applying. It's not going to go over the whole model, but that's the optimum amount that you want on your brush. And then if we start to apply this on our palette, there you go. Now, one thing we did just mention there, well, didn't mention, is, but kind of half demonstrated, is the application of the paint. And we will go into detail on this in just a minute. But how much contact you're having with your piece of paper, or in the proper case is a model, is important. Because you can control where it's going then. And the same thing goes for the highlighter pens, for example, is you're trying to get it so that it applies over an area, and you want to be careful and you want to be methodical. You do not want to try and paint in your Space Marine's leg or something like this. That is not how you do that, because that's how you end up with this kind of thing. You can see it over there. We were doing the same thing. You can see how you see every little brush stroke. Whereas you got this, that was 3 brush strokes. This over here in the middle part was 1 brush stroke. The nice parts of this were 1 brush stroke. This is not how you apply the contrast paint. You're being too rough with it. Basically, that's what ends up happening to your brush. You see, that's how it's all splayed out again. Now, you just have to be careful. You have to glide across the surface of the model. Because, again, when you're doing this kind of thing, when you're really kind of jabbing it on and like heavily applying it, like that kind of thing, it's just really just bullying your brush, basically. What's going on there is, as I understand it, the science of it, and it's not very scientific, I'm not a scientist, but what's going on there is contrast paint is filling up your brush, and then when you're jabbing it on and like really kind of brush stroking it on like you would a base or layer paint, all of the pigment that's inside is being deposited along the way with each of those brush strokes. Whereas when you're keeping towards the tip and you're being gentle with it, the color that you're actually wanting, which is the lighter color, as demonstrated on this screen, this color around here around the outside, you're wanting that in the in the recesses, but this around the outside, that's the color you're after, right? You're wanting it to deposit the heavy pigment in here, and you're wanting it to keep the light stuff around here. Whereas if you're banging that heavy pigment out, like over here, like here and here and here, by kind of doing a brush stroke that's like this, you're depositing it all along the way. Whereas if you're gentle with it and move across like that, you're sticking towards that lighter pigment that sticks towards the outside of the brush. There you go. You still with me, chat? Are you finding this useful? Are you finding it interesting? Are you learning anything new? Useful and interesting. Excellent, Jared. One thing I would say is also include some less extreme examples of an overloaded brush. Yeah, we'll get to that in just a sec, Captain Manrings. But good point. Good point. We're going to actually ruin a doom flare. For this next bit. Do some blood splatter analysis. Well, as you can see, somebody here really abused a medium layer brush. Uh, this medium layer brush was clearly used to perform some sort of awful demonstration. Yeah, I mean, look at that. As you can see how the pigment has really moved down there. So it's just formed this triangle drip right there because of that fold in the cloak. And like a cloak has a bunch of folds in it, right? So this is what's happening at the bottom of your cloaks if you're using way too much paint. And like I said, it is what happens on your armor panels. Is if you start with a lot of if you start with a heavy amount of paint at the top of a leg and you pull it down and you don't do anything to that heavy bit that's at the top of the leg, this will start to happen. It will run down. And if it's a really smooth a really smooth knee, if it's a really smooth kind of shin pad, like stuff like the Horus Heresy Space Marines, for example, they have like the Mark 6 armor. It's just a straight down. It's not a knee pad and then the shin. It's just the shin goes up over the knee. So what will happen is if you start with a huge amount at the top, there's no recess halfway along for this heavy pigment to kind of flow into, which is what's happening there basically. So it will create a dark spot wherever the gravity basically stops halfway down the leg. Is essentially how that works. So yeah, what we're going to do next is we're going to basically do an example of it. Whoa. Look at that exposure. Brr. Just bring that down, right? That's what we'll do. We're going to do an example on this guy. Yeah, that'll do. Of doing it too much and doing it not enough, and we'll do it just right on this side as well. And this is a really good example because we've got large open panels, but we've got these recesses along the way which should help us a little bit, but we'll get into that in just a minute. Is basically what we're going to do. As long as you guys are enjoying it, that's all that matters. Just want to make sure that I've actually 13 minutes. Yeah. I think we talked for 13 minutes about butchering a palette pad. So what colour do you want us to... Shall we do on this guy? I think arguably we should do something that's really problematic, like Basilicanum Grey, which will really accentuate the problem. This is a really old pot of it. Ah, no, I do have a new one. There we go. That's perfect. Let's do Basilicanum Grey because it is a bugger of a paint. Basilicanum Grey to really test your patience. There you go. I think I put a mixing ball in this one. Yeah, sounds like I did. Okay, let's do it. Let's do Basilicanum Grey. All right. Okay, so that's all well and good when we're doing that on a piece of flat paper, but let's actually do this on a model, shall we? So we're going to work on, well, this, and we're going to ruin it, basically, by demonstrating what you shouldn't do first and then demonstrating what you should do first. And then we'll do what you can do to make things a little bit easier. So hopefully we've got segments here, so hopefully we don't use all of them. But we're going to start by doing things wrong, and we're going to use Basilicanum Grey to do that, because Basilicanum Grey for me is famously quite a annoying paint. It doesn't quite do what you want it to do sometimes. So first up, what we're going to do is we're going to load the brush up with way too much paint. And then we're going to try and apply it, okay? So you go, you can see how it's kind of forming a drip. And we're just going to start, I think, here. So we'll apply this over the wheel. And there we go. Oh dear. So you see how it's just really, 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 really dark. And we're going to have to keep going to try and get it to actually look grey. And what you'll start to see is the more we use it, the more it starts to come out as the colour we actually want, which is just there. So if we go on to the next one here, there you go. That's the colour that we thought we picked in the first place. So now we've got all of this dark patchiness. So now we want to go in and try and move it around to rescue it. But as you can see, these kind of spots and stuff, it's not perfect, but it'll do, right? There we go. Now similarly, if we don't have enough paint on our brush, which is probably about that, this is the scratchy finish that we're going to see next. So we're going to apply this like that. We're starting to run out now. There we go. So it's kind of weak. It's kind of not very well covered. It's not really doing a contrast thing either. Just going to try and do with that. And, well, this is like kind of starting to dry now. And, well, we're just going to try and do a little bit more correcting to it, as it were. Because we've noticed that there's too much there. So now we've got wildly different finishes. You see? Wildly different finishes on those things. Now similarly, if we don't take a particularly methodical approach, and we just use probably about the right amount of contrast paint, but let's say we just want to kind of do these two segments of the wheel here, then if we kind of, like, we just don't, like I said, we don't take a methodical approach to this, we're going to get patchiness, right? So we're just going to, like, start, like, right here in the middle. And I'm being pretty gentle here. There we go. So again, completely different colour. You see it's a bit spotty here, and this, that, and the other. Very dark over here. Very light over here. About right, but again, not quite right. And there you go. I mean, these are the kinds of things that you see happen with your contrast paint. It's just wildly inconsistent based on the kind of the way that you're applying the paint. And we can do something very similar with another very, very problematic paint in the form of something like Dark Angel's Green. And so again, if we take Dark Angel's Green and we try and apply this to, let's say, these two segments here and here, and we just load up the brush with a slightly too much paint, we'll actually put a little bit more on, and then we try and apply this. I nearly dabbed it off. That would have been bad. Again, see, look how it's really, really dark. And that's not the colour that you're after. See? you're actually after, if I just pull most of that paint off, the colour that you thought you were getting was going to be something along the lines of that sort of green right there. And that doesn't look like there's too much of a difference, but trust me, there is. It's the camera. So you see it's really dark down here, nice and flat and smooth up there. See if I can get it to... There we go. So how can we kind of avoid these things? Well, we've talked about it, okay? We want to get a nice consistent amount of paint on the brush. We want to be nice and methodical with it as we apply it. And we want to just kind of take it very steady. We don't want to kind of try and attack it too quickly. We don't want to do anything like that. We just want to be gentle with the paint. We want to kind of just brush across the surface of the model. So we're going to keep with Dark Angels Green just for the moment, because again, it's quite a notoriously tricky paint. That is probably about the right amount of paint. It's not splaying out. And we're going to, over the top of this segment here, now what we're going to do is we're going to go across it very gently, just sticking towards basically the tip of the brush. And we're using the recesses and stuff to apply the paint, well, basically as our guide track, and that's going to create a little runoff for all that really heavy pigment to go into, which will give us a really nice smooth finish across these large flat open panels. There you go, like that. And you see how I wasn't really revisiting too much. We're just kind of going from down here and moving along the panel. We don't want to kind of attack the panel all over. We want to just go across it like a highlighter pen. If you were to do multiple layers of text, you would wanted to go through your text like 1, 2, 3, 4 to the point of where you had your entire paragraph highlighted. That would be how you would do it. You wouldn't want to scribble across the whole paragraph like I was doing, because you get all those brush marks and all those tide lines. It's more of a caress than brushing, as Alan says in the chat. He's absolutely correct. You're wanting to glide across the surface of the model rather than brush it onto the model. Because when we're going to apply stuff like base and layer paints, you brush it on. You attack it, essentially. You're not like scraping it on, but when you're applying a base or layer paint, you will often see it demonstrated where you're coming on and you're just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're just applying it like this. Where with the contrast paint, you're wanting to go across very gently, very smoothly, just gliding across, flow across the model. Don't abuse it, because if you abuse the contrast paint, it will reflect the action that you took. More so than base or layer does. Base and layer will reflect the action that you took in terms of the way that you brushed it on, but you cover that by doing 2 layers. Whereas if you do 2 layers of contrast paint, as we've spoken about when it comes to highlighter pens, you get the second layer appearing alongside the first layer at the same time. And we can demonstrate that on our palette paper right now by taking some more Blood Angels Red. And I shall demonstrate this for you by popping it just down here, getting that ready, adjusting this, and then we pop back. So now here, if I'm like, oh, I'm just going to correct that area, I'll take some Blood Angels Red and I'll go across it. There you go. What we have there, let me do it here as well. What we have going on here or indeed over the top of this scratchiness. If we come really closely, what we have going on is now, particularly on this piece here, it's where it's best example of it's come up. You can see we've got the dark thing right in the middle, we've got the outer thing from the first brush load, and then our new thing going across it, we're creating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different reds. And that is what happens when you try and apply it over the top of itself once it starts to dry. You're duplicating the colour, you're doubling up on it. It's not going to correct like a red paint will do, like Mephiston red. If we apply Mephiston red and we had this kind of slightly darker and lighter sort of thing going on because we'd primed over a bright colour, then we'll just apply a second Mephiston red and it will look like that. You can see it down here as well. You see how we've got this discoloration between that and that. You can see a very clear line between those two areas. There and there. See it here, that kind of thing. You can see it up here. See how it's reflecting the scratchiness underneath it. See? See what I mean? So that's what's happening, basically. Contrast repaint is... The contrast paint is just... Yeah, it's not doing such a great job, because you've doubled it up, basically, is the whole thing. Makes sense, I hope. See you later, Jaheric. Ah. Can you put the pot in frame to see you loading the brush? Yes, I'll do that for you now. In fact, let's just do a close-up example. As requested by Cameron, we'll just quickly show you loading up the brush. Close up, here is our pot of Blood Angels Red, here is our medium layer brush. So we're just going to come in here. There we go. It's about right. It's not quite right, so what I would just do is touch it on the edge of the lid there, like that, just to get rid of some of it. Do it again, and there we go, that's about right. So again, if I just load it up with too much, there you go, that's too much paint. So if we just touch it on the edge of the lid, like that, you see, that's about right. Often what I'll do if I'm in a rush, as you can tell with my thumb, is I'll take my brush load and I'll go way too much, touch some of that off, touch it on my thumb, and then I'm good to go. It's basically, that's how I do it. Good thing to add to the video. Do you ever worry about the paint in the lid being bad? No, because I always give it a shake. Always give it a good shake. So I always do this. So I always give it this. That much. And it should be all good in the lid. Whew. How do you correct mistakes? Like if I hit a little metallic over my contrast, that's done. I'll show you that in a minute. Parthenat, not Parthenats, Chimp Duckman. Do you ever get bubbles in the paint as you're applying it from the brush? Sometimes that can happen, yeah. Make sure you fully close the lids. I learned this the hard way. Do you leave the pot open when you're painting the same colour for a while? Yeah, I do, Hungry Bert. What I will do, though, is if, like, say I'm painting, like, 10 guys, I will, after the first guy is done, I will close the pot and give it a reshake. Basically. That's how I do that. Okay. So now what we need to do is just look really closely at this. Now that it's fully dried. Okay, so this is now fully dried, and we can look really closely at what's happened here. And this is often where the mistakes like actually start to kind of jump out at you after things have dried. And this is as a consequence of the things that we've talked about, right? So if we look very closely here, you can see every single kind of brush mark right in there from where we tried to kind of correct it or muss it or trying to go in and add a little bit more. You can see here from where we didn't have enough paint on our brush that it looks like a little bit dusty and stuff around in places. It doesn't look quite as contrasty. We can see that we've missed patches. I've definitely missed patches on the Dark Angels green. It does happen from time to time. I do not always get it 100% correct. You see I've missed a little blob in there as well. It's difficult to tell if you've missed stuff when you've done contrast paint because it's so shiny and wet. You just have, if you're not careful, you generally will do things like miss like a brush mark there, whereas it looked like it was fully done before. That's just a case of a miss. It's not pulled back because it's too neat and tidy for it to be having pulled back. You can see here where there's way too much Dark Angels green. There's nowhere for that darker pigment to flow, so we've just overloaded the place, and as you can see around this section here, it's all dark. There's a little bit of a dry thing going on here. It's a bit bright around there. That's all nice, but you've just got this kind of darkness going on here. It looks almost black because we used way too much paint. Got this kind of treacly effect here because where all of the paint has run down from here because of gravity, because we used too much, it's run down here and it's collected there. You see what I mean? See, it's much nicer on these panels, but again, it's a little bit stainy around here where we actually were a little bit more methodical with the grey. You can see over here as well, just there's that blob down there. Again, just from using too much paint, whereas if we look at the other side, where we were methodical with it, it's much better. There isn't as much kind of darkness going on here. There is a little bit. I've got a wet brush there. That's not paint. I also did just miss a bit around here as well. So there you go. It's just much more effective. Now, as mentioned, Dark Angels green is a bit of a pain in the butt to use. It's better when you're methodical like that. It's like majority of it looks really nice. It's got a little bit of slight darkness going on here, where again gravity has just collected it just here, where it's gone on nice and smooth, but it's just moved down the model to this little bit here, where it's just created a little bit of kind of darkness. If we go a little bit closer, you might be able to see it'll be slightly raised a little bit. Oh no, maybe not. It's not too bad. You can definitely see it around here though. See how thick that is? Where it's all collected. It's just basically black there. There you go. As a consequence of doing that. Whereas we haven't had that problem. You see over here how the paint has stopped where we stopped. Because we didn't have too much. It hasn't all run down and started kind of moving into this area as well. So there you go. So the question has come up in the chat, it often does, about how would we correct something like this. Well, in this instance, I often recommend using the sort of glazes to do so. Glazes of a similar base or layer paint. In the case of Dark Angels Green, we would go for Caliban Green, which is what we would just kind of thin it down with sort of 3 or 4 parts water and just kind of go over the top. And it, as if you do it just like as a normal kind of relayer, like a just thin it down normally, like 1 or 2 parts water, as you would to apply a base or layer paint. What you'll get is you'll get a very clear distinction between the two paints that have gone on. Whereas when you thin it down to a glaze consistency, it does just kind of, well, it just goes on. It still retains some of what's underneath it, but it applies a kind of flat layer, as it were, over the top, which helps correct and smooth things out. Now, if, for example, you accidentally, as it's come up, you accidentally blob a little bit of metal onto a contrast color, for example, then what you can do very simply, very quickly, is if you catch it as it's happening. It doesn't always happen this way, but if you accidentally, for example, just take a little bit of Iron Warriors and we just do that, for example, what we can do is just wash our brush really quickly and then wipe it off with the brush like that. If you don't catch it quick enough, again, sometimes once it's dry, you can just add a little bit of pressure and it will come off. Just be really careful. Only use your brush, don't use your finger, because you'll rub off the paint. But in the same instance, you can use that glaze. And what we'll just do a little example of that glazing. And we need Caliban Green for that. Just going to give it a good shake. And then I'm going to tap it on my knee because it's an old paint. There we go. And I'm just going to apply a little bit of this on my palette over here. And I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4 brush loads of water. Give it a good mixing so it becomes really, really very, very thin. What we then do is grab a really small amount of it, like that sort of amount. It's really, really thin. And then just on the model, we just start to apply it. And because it's thin, it will still reflect what's underneath it, but it will just start to smooth out that darkness. You really don't need very much. There you go. If we do it on this dramatically different side as well, it will take a little bit. It would take a little bit more effort to do because of how dark it is. But it will start to make it feel a little bit more like the green that you were after in the first place. If I just apply it over this mist part. You see, it's not a very strong paint that we've made up. So you can see over here, it's already started to have the effect that we want. Just add a little bit more green down there. There we go. That'll look great. There we go. Does every contrast paint have a corresponding layer or base that would color match it in this way? Not every single one. In that instant, like, I think in that, the answer to that question is, if you're trying to achieve a certain color, then that's where you can get your glaze from. So if you watch the video from yesterday about coming up with the Emperor's Children pink, what I was trying to achieve was Emperor's Children as a color. So I did that, but in order to fix it if I made any mistakes, as we just talked about there, I wanted to be able to use an Emperor's Children glaze that wouldn't completely change the makeup of that paint, of that color. So that's where we were basically trying to mix to a point where Emperor's Children would apply, and it does in that instance, if that makes sense. Is contrast medium useful? Yes, it is. I almost exclusively paint with contrast straight from the pot. Should I be using my wet palette instead? No, Gordon Freeman. Don't Gordon Freeman. don't put contrast paint on your wet palette. The reason why you don't want to put contrast paint on your wet palette is because you won't be able to control how much extra wet is getting into your contrast paint. You'll be basically diluting it, and you'll be diluting it with water, which you shouldn't do. I think we will do a video. We'll do a stream, I think maybe next week, of just Lahmian medium versus contrast medium versus water, and why it shouldn't, what are the best uses for all three? Because again, that's a question that comes up a lot, and I think having a specific thing about that would be quite useful. Is there going to be a recording of this? There is, Captain. But I think we'll do a specific video on it rather than have it bolted onto this one. We did do a bit of Lahmian medium work in the last one, the one that happened last week, the video that came out yesterday. We could do a little bit of it in this as well, but I think it's just better in general as part of the series. If it's 3 parts, if it's just, you know, come up with a scheme, how to avoid mistakes. Well, not mistakes, how to avoid splotches, scratches, and blotches. And then medium versus medium, because part of how to avoid it is using mediums, but it's a much more in-depth topic in the terms of contrast paint being the way contrast paint is. Using contrast medium to thin down contrast paint to make it easier to apply doesn't necessarily make sense. Whereas I've found that using Lahmian medium to make it easier to apply does make sense. Using Basilicanum with Lahmian medium on Lead Belcher primer, and it's hardly taking any tips on getting it to take. Yeah, you need to make that. You need to make that. That primer's basically too glossy. The Lead Belcher's gone on. It's really it's too slidey. It's got a gloss to it. So when you're trying to apply the contrast paint that's thinned down with Lahmian medium, what it's doing is it's just beading up and running to wherever it can. What we need to do is add some Lead Belcher rather than straight over the primer, or give it a really vigorous like brushing with a stiff dry brush to try and kind of not mess the primer up, but to just kind of get rid of that kind of gloss finish to it. If you get a good wiry dry brush, not a wiry dry brush, if you get a good like stiff white dry brush and not like kind of grind it into the model, but give it a good going over, that should help. Otherwise, do a layer of lead belcher, a thin down layer of lead belcher, because the Retributor armor and lead belcher sprays, they've just got too much of a gloss to it. So it's not, I think the correct term is it hasn't got enough surface tension, I think is the correct term, but I don't want to kind of swear by that. But yeah, there we go. Yeah. Do we do the last? Should do the last part, really. How are we going to do this? Yeah, we'll just go for it. Okay. So finally, if we're putting together all the things that we've kind of talked about today, what we have is we have a Blade Guard veteran that was originally intended to be a Deathwing Blade Guard veteran, and we just need to very briefly touch on the reformulated shades, because the reformulated shades work in exactly the same way as the contrast paints, and you should treat them the same way as the contrast paints. They're much less saturated than the contrast paints, but they work the same way. So if you blob it on, you will get gravity will start to run down that darker pigment onto the flats. If you don't have enough, it will kind of have a bit of a scratchy finish. If you throw it on there, it will kind of settle in all kinds of weird places. You just want to approach it really, really slowly. And this has come up because we're talking about this basically because of the Deathwing videos and stuff. A lot of people say Seraphim Sepia does not work this way. It does. This is a reformulated Seraphim Sepia. The old Seraphim Sepia does not work this way, but reformulated shades. And the reformulation happened a few years ago. Well, it happened almost 3 years ago. And, well, like I said, they work in exactly the same way. So I've got Seraphim Sepia here, I have a Blade Guard veteran, and, well, this is an example of a model where we're actually going to paint it properly in some ways. So what we want to do here to avoid kind of the coffee staining and all this kind of thing is we want to pick a place to start. And the place to start, probably on this leg, for example, is going to be at the top here, and we're going to want to bring it down like this. Or we're just going to tackle this on, like, for example, the boot here. So we're just going to apply this very gently, again sticking to the tip of our brush like this. We're gliding across the surface of the model. We've got a flat bit here, we just want to bring it across like so. And one thing you'll notice as I'm doing this is that if I finish my brush stroke halfway through because of an angle being a problem, I will change the angle and start from the same place. So we want to move like this. We've got a rogue hair. I think we got it. No, we didn't. It's there. So just want to, again, start where we finished, like so, without collecting any extra paint. Similarly, just going to go a little bit more. We've got this little section here. We just do that little section like that. We missed a little bit in there. We've just about got ready enough time to do that. And we're going to do this little rondel here as well, like that sort of thing. And then we've got the back. So we're just going to go back, get a little bit more paint, and we're just going to drag our brush methodically across the back of the leg, like so. Got another little rondel just here. Just going to apply that over the top, like so. Grab a little bit more paint, and now we're going to start up here. Pull it down. Like that. Get this over the top of the rest of the leg. Another little rondel just in there. Back of the leg. Like that. And there we go. We have a perfect Deathwing leg. We've got a little bit of an overspill here, which we might be able to just gently get our brush to just pick it up. Just like that, very gently. The shades have got a little bit of a longer drying time than contrast paint, but the same thing works. But there we go. That's how we do it. The thing with contrast paint is it's predictable in its unpredictability. But the same thing for you as a painter is you are predictable in your unpredictability. In this instance, as you saw as I was painting in that leg, we were very, very smooth, and we were just going very methodically across the pieces of the armor and the components and stuff. And as long as we're doing that, the paint will follow what you're doing. If you are unpredictable with your brushwork, or you're heavy with your brushwork, the paint will reflect what you are doing. So we'll do the same thing. We'll now do an unpredictable heavy version on this leg here. So we'll just go like that. There we go. It's done quicker, but now we've got all of that dark there. And we've missed parts. So thankfully, because we're on a shade part, we can just leave that. Well, we could fix that, but we won't for the sake of this video. Same thing. We're just going to be really unpredictable here on the back. We'll do the same thing on the backpack here. You see? And there you go. Watch as it dries. And there's the difference between the two. You can already see how it's going to. You've got the orange spotting here. Orange spotting back here. Got it there on that rondel. Whereas when I did it, we got it where you want it to be. There you go. There you go. Big cheese, man. But how'd you get, like, what do you think, guys? How's that? Jacob Schutz, thank you very much for the $10. Love the streams, big man. Thanks for interacting with us. You're very welcome, Jacob. And Captain Mannings, thank you very much for being a member for 22 months. Keep on live streaming. One of the best streams. Same guy from earlier. Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, that's kind of it. So what we'll do is we will cut that into a video, so to have as a full record for you to be able to just kind of view at your viewing pleasure, like we did last week or a week or two ago. Week or two ago. It wasn't last Wednesday. It was the Wednesday before. But that fundamentally is it. That is you tried and failed, bro. Oh no, I failed so hard, Big Cheese. What a shame. I'm so sorry. Oh look. There you go. So, do you know what's really funny about that? He's had to subscribe on 2 accounts to do that. Because it's subscribers only. And he'll probably do it again now. There we go. That is fundamentally the how to avoid contrast splotches, blotches, and scratches. I hope this is useful. And I hope you enjoyed that, seeing the live demonstration of it in action, basically. Yeah, there you go. Good stream? How long do washers stay workable? I have some old world wools, but they don't have harnesses, etc. to break them up into. Where areas would like to try your wolf recipe with the wet blending. The washers stay workable for a little bit longer. I'd say probably about 50% longer than contrast paint. And because they are not as saturated, if you go over them just a little bit here and there, you don't notice it so much. They are just that little bit easier to work with. That said, they're not as strong in their colours, right? So stuff like Berserker Bloodshade isn't a good substitute for red. It's not. Same as like the greens, they're not good substitutes for the greens. You can't do everything with shades, but they are much more workable. What I kind of noticed on the Gitmob stuff was using the shade paints. Basically as the base, the Agrax Earth shade, and then applying the other stuff on. It just create a really workable area for the contrast paints to go over the top of. So you shouldn't have too much of an issue doing any kind of wolves and stuff that way. If you're just throwing Agrax Earth shade on, it'll stay workable for quite a while. But that being said, it doesn't matter if they haven't got the saddles and stuff to break up the models. The break up the model. You do have things like some muscle groupings can just about be somewhere where it kind of can be a section that can stop at. For example, just behind an arm of a wolf and stuff like that. That is a place where you can just about get away with it sometimes. If you've got a defined muscle line as well, that can be a place that creates a separation between sections on a model, because that's where you're wanting your darkest paint to end up anyway. So stopping there, and if you then go on to the next section and you go over it, you're duplicating the effect in exactly the place where you want it to anyway, so you should be all good. Aidan Hughes, thank you very much for the 10. Screw the haters. Love these streams, Josh. Keep it up. These colour theory streams and vids are fascinating. By the way, what do you use to thin Basilicanum Grey down with? Lamium Medium or Contrast? Generally, I would use Lamium Medium to thin down Basilicanum Grey, only just because it's Basilicanum Grey in itself isn't a horrible color. It's perfectly fine, as you can see on this guy, but it's just really unpredictable. So using contrast medium, you're actually going to take away from the color. You kind of, like I said before, if you have one brush load of Basilicanum Grey and one brush load of contrast medium, what you're getting is half the strength Basilicanum Grey. If you use Lamium medium, what you're getting there is you're getting maybe 70%, even 80% the strength of Basilicanum Grey, but you're adding workability to it. You're adding a little bit more flow to it. So Lamium medium would be my recommendation for Basilicanum Grey. It's generally, as I would recommend, is using Lamium medium to thin down the really annoying paints like Dark Angels Green, Ultramarines Blue, Leviathan Blue, Basilicanum Grey, and so on and so forth. And basically, they're all the darker ones. Yeah. But thank you, Aidan. That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. I noticed last night Cryptguard takes shades really well. Yeah, they do. They've got so many really, really nice little muscle groupings and stuff on it that they hold it really nicely. So I talked about in the last one with the Skaven tails. You don't want a full contrast paint on like a Skaven tail because it's too saturated, whereas a shade's perfect for it because it's so much kind of smaller recesses and detailing and stuff on it that when you use a shade paint on it, you're getting the kind of darkest pigment of the shade in all of the kind of the links of the tail, but you're not having to do a highlight to have any like kind of brighter parts. Nice, thanks for answering my question. Love you, big guy. Love you too, Aidan. I've noticed Basilicanum Grey and Dark Angels Green split the fastest out of all my contrast pots. Yeah, that'll be because of the weight of the pigments that are in there, which is why it's unpredictable paint. There's basically two that are in any of these contrast paints, apart from some of the single pigment ones. We'll get to that later, or in another stream. But any of the ones that are designed to do darker and lighter at the same time, so not Bile Red, Imperial Fist, blah 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 blah, Black Legion, so on and so forth. When they're designed to be kind of that two color contrast paint, you'll have a heavier pigment and a lighter pigment. Basically, the intention of the heavy pigment is that it runs into the darker recesses, which is where it should be, and the heavier pigment is always darker, and the lighter pigment is the one that sort of sits on the flat of the thing, and then will dry, and as it dries, it creates it constricts the skin, which is supposed to pull back and give you that slight edge highlight that you get, basically. And that's kind of, as I understand it, that's the science behind them. Whereas, so when you have a paint like Basilicanum Grey, it's got a really heavy dark pigment in it. You can see how mine's really dark really bright on the bottom, which doesn't make any sense, but that's just the pigment doing that. It's because that's all the heavy stuff is down here at the bottom and the light stuff's at the top. So Dark Angels Green does the same thing. What else does it? Shaiish Purple does that. Militarum Green can do that. Ultramarines Blue definitely does it. Stormfiend does it. Would you recommend mixing balls for more tricky paint? Yeah, they can help. Yeah, they can absolutely help. War Judge, you said something about buying contrast paints, which I read and then missed. I ordered nearly the entire range of contrast because of how easy and approachable you make it look. I truly appreciate you and your teachings. You are gold to me. That's very kind of you, War Judge. Hello, Jack. Would you change anything about your 143rd Krieg Regiment scheme with the new contrast paints? I don't know as if I would. The only thing I might possibly change is using the darker blue of Dreer's coat for the darker blue, because I think Games Workshop themselves have made the Krieg blue much darker, and at the inside of the coat is much lighter. I think that's the only thing I would possibly change, really. Other than like maybe slight color swaps, if I'm doing like a mix that ends up looking like a shade, that would be a change. But I don't go through my old videos thinking about it, as it were. So that's the only thing. But yeah, I think I still stand by that video. I think it's quite good. Another question: why do you shade Black Legion with Null Oil? Isn't it already black enough, especially in the recesses? It is. The reason we use the Null Oil over the top of it is just to take it that little step further. Black Legion basically has a slight air of brown about it. Especially if you've ever thinned down, basically what I would recommend, thin down Black Legion just once, and you'll see what what makes it up. There's brown to it, basically. The Null Oil goes over the top to take out the brown, basically. That's why. Is there a major difference between Black Legion and Black Templar? Oh yes, Brian. Yes, there's a big difference. Black Templar is basically Black Templar is a 2 pigment contrast paint where it has a really nice dark black for the recesses, and then the rest of it is a sort of grey. It's a bluish grey. So when you apply it over the top of a miniature, what you get is dark grey. You don't get black. Whereas Black Legion is basically a single pigment contrast paint. It's not fully, but it's basically... Black Legion comes out black with hints of brown to it, but it's much blacker, basically. Which is why I just think it's better for black, whereas Black Templar is actually really good for dark grey. Black Templar looks kind of bluey. It does. It does. Yeah. Black Templar is lovely for dark grey. It's not great for black, which is why back in generally towards the beginning of the deep Warhipster lore, it's not that deep. We can actually put some music on now. We used to apply a paint and then apply Black Templar. So we would use something like Ultramarines Blue and then apply a Black Templar over the top. And the reason we would do that is so that we would get a much darker Black Templar, basically. Because, as we talked about at the beginning of the stream, contrast paint creates a reflection of what's underneath it. So if you apply Black Templar over the top of a colour, what you get is a black version of that colour. Or a really dark version of that colour. So in order to get the true black of what we wanted for that you normally see in the way like Space Marines are painted, for example, you would need to do a pre-shade, is what we used to call it, of something to then put Black Templar over the top for it to look like black, basically. Whereas Black Legion, just throw it on. And then you can shade it to give it a slight tint. And as Aiden was asking, I use Null Oil. And it makes it like super dark black. If you use Drakenhof Nightshade, it gives it a hint of blue. If you use Tyrann Blue, it gives it an even brighter hint of blue. You can use Druchii Violet to give it a hint of purple. You could use Poxwalker to give it a hint of green, and so on and so forth. Black Templar plus medium is a better shade than Null, in my opinion. I do agree with you, Sponge Monkey. Sometimes it's a little too strong. It's really good, but sometimes it's a little too strong. Yandan Yellow and the flesh contrast seems so blotchy and streaky. Yeah, they can be. It is kind of on a paint by paint basis. Fireslayer flesh being darker, the way I kind of, when I look at the 3 flesh paints we have, Guilliman flesh, Dark Oath flesh, and Fireslayer flesh, is that they basically all have the same bright pigment, and then they have varying stages of heavy in the thing, because they kind of look very similar. It's just that Fireslayer flesh has got a bit more orange to it, or a bit more red to it, and Dark Oath flesh has got a little bit more orange to it. As a consequence of that, it means Fireslayer flesh has got heavier pigment, which means it's a little bit harder to apply. Oh god, I just dropped my brush. Oh, I'm never going to see that brush again. Hang on, I'm going to go and get it. Where's it gone? Ah! Huh. I really will never see that brush again. Bizarre. I genuinely can't see it. How bizarre. Okay, well, I'll remember. I'll remember that I dropped it, and we'll find it later. Can we get a GoFundMe for Josh to get a new brush? Just the one brush, no others. No, it's alright, I can buy a new brush if I need to. It'll be here somewhere. God, that's just weird. I think it might have rolled under the PC. In which case, that's a little bit dicing with death trying to get down there. Anyway. Brush it off as a loss. Yeah, okay, Gothic. My medium layer brush is gone forever. Down tools, no more painting until we replace it. I won't be able to make the videos that I was being yelled at to make. What is the WD-40 for in the background? It was to fix my chair. Can I mix a light contrast colour with a dark contrast colour to obtain a colour that I don't have, like Griffhound Orange with Blood Angels Red, to get something close to Bile Red? Kind of, yes. I mean, yes, you can do that. It won't be 100% accurate. But in that instance, in that example, Bile Red is a single pigment paint, so you're not gonna get the properties of Bile Red by doing that. Bile Red just goes on. It doesn't do the shading thing. It doesn't do the lighter pigment thing. It's just the same pigment all the way through. But yeah, theoretically, yeah, anything works. Yeah. I just watched your Magnus video, which was amazing. I've just bought him, but I'm really worried about using contrast on his large surface will create streaks. Any tips? Love your content. This video, this whole stream might help. Are you planning on covering Borget's Beast Grabbers? No. I don't have them. So, it could be something we do eventually, but I don't have them. So there isn't currently a plan to do them, as it were. Sorry. If I can get a hold of a copy of them, then maybe we'll do it. But at the moment, I haven't got the time to do them. I wouldn't want to promise something and then not deliver immediately, as it were. Do you have one of Trazen's pocket dimensions under your desk? Yeah, sometimes it feels like that. But yeah, one thing we will just probably conclude our video with is if we do the, let's just quickly, so now that this is dry, we can just show what it looks like basically, and then I think we're done. So there it is. That's what it looks like after it's dried. And you can see where, as reflection of everything that I did to it, it's not so bad around here, but you can see, like, for example, on this leg here, you can see how it's collected in a couple of places. Again, that's just because of the way gravity has kind of kicked in here, and it's sort of dripped down to those kind of sections. You can see I've missed bits in there. You've got slightly over heavy brushing and stuff. Got this kind of section going on here. Over here we're pretty smooth over the top of that front, and over here we're not. Same on the feet, same on the foot here, and on the back you can see the same thing going on there. So yeah, kind of quite heavy stuff going on in the recesses here, but then got kind of staining and stuff here and here, where it's just, again, the gravity has taken effect and it's just rolled down towards the bottom, and it's created those splotches here, here and here. And we haven't had that issue really on this leg. So yeah, there you go. If you go over it again, you just get a darker streak. That is correct. Yes. I think in that instance, if you just go and, you should then treat that first layer as basically pre-shading for what your base or layer is. If it's really bad, just pick up a base or layer paint and go over the top of it. And some people will say, what's the point in using the contrast paint in the first place? Well, in that instance, actually what you've done is you saved yourself 3 layers worth of time. Because in the example of Dark Angel, if we get it completely wrong, we have a terrible armor panel. But if we just apply Caliban green over the top of that one single layer of Dark Angel's green, what we've done is we skipped out the 2 thin coats of Caliban green, followed by the shading, followed by the relayer. The relayer is what's happening now. So you're on 2 coats already. So you're 2 coats ahead of somebody who's doing it in a classic way, basically. If you treat every classic paint recipe as being multiple thin coats, plus shading, plus a relayer, which is the quicker way of doing it, because some people will argue that a recess shade is quicker. Well, yeah, you're skipping out a relayer there. But even if you're doing, let's call it Blood Angels, you're doing 2 layers of Mephiston red, 2 thin coats of Mephiston red to get a nice strong red, and then recess shading with Agrax Earthshade. You're skipping out the relayer to bring it back up to the red that you actually want it to be, but you're spending a lot of time on recess shading. Recess shading is almost as time consuming as edge highlighting, because you do still need to tidy it up unless you get it perfect, and I've never gotten it perfect ever. So in that instance, your contrast paint is just supplying the 2 thin coats and the shade before you're relayering a paint over the top. So you're saving 3 coats worth of time by doing it that way. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, check out my Deathcore of Creed videos. It's exactly that. We can either layer on Steel Legion Drab 2 to 3 times to get a nice smooth coat, then shade it with a brown to bring it down, then relayer Steel Legion Drab, and then highlight it with Carrick Stone. Or we can go Snakebite Leather, Steel Legion Drab, Carrick Stone. That's why I do it that way, because what I want the colour to be is Steel Legion Drab. What I don't want to do is spend hours painting Steel Legion Drab in order to shade it and then relayer it and then highlight it. So use Snakebite Leather to get the shading I want, Steel Legion Drab to get the colour I want. And that's okay. That is another way of using contrast paints. That is another way of getting your models painted. It's very quick. It's all about speed, you see. It might not seem like this method where you're doing it carefully is very quick, but it's like, yeah, but you are saving a bunch of time because you're doing one. Do I have a suggestion for the Troggoth skin? Oh, Braggots. Borgits, sorry. Borgits. My goodness. There's not really a close-up of him. God, that's annoying. It's a tricky one. I think what I would do is I would probably pick a brown. I'd probably do something like take a thinned down sort of 1-to-1 mix of Lamia Medium and Saigal Brown and apply that for the darker area, and then shade it with Druchii Violet to give it a purple hue over the top of the brown. Is how I would get that dark skin. And then you'd want to blend it into Skeleton Horde on the tummy. Would be how I would do that, I think. How would you go about getting the really dark purple of Paul Dainton's interpretation of Telemach on Lyris? I want to do something similar for my EC coming up. I don't know what that looks like. You're going to make me Google it. Paul Dainton Telemach on Lyris. Images. I don't know what I'm looking for, honestly. I don't know what I'm looking at. Is it a guy with 2 swords? Dressed in pink? Because that looks like Lucius to me. Where can I find... Yeah, guy with 2 swords. It's... To me, it looks black with pink edging. It's difficult to do from artwork, is the problem. Because artwork is inherently darker. Like, a painted ultramarine looks nothing like a lot of the ultramarine's artwork. If you want really, really, really dark purple, you can use something like... If you want it to be a dark, cold purple, use Leviathan purple and then go over the top of it with, like, thinned down Shaiish purple. But honestly, you're probably better off... Like, I will be looking at a piece of artwork very differently to how you're looking at a piece of artwork, because the only way I can look at that piece of artwork is on my monitor, and the way the color on my monitor might be presenting it is different to how the color on your monitor or phone or whatever is presenting it. So honestly, at that point, you're better off testing the paints yourself at that point. I know that sounds like a cop-out answer, but like, if I can see a model, hold a model, look at a box, like if I can look at, like, for example, Glorfindel there. I can look at that and I can see it myself, and I know it's a photo, but I can look at it here without it being brought to me through HDR or anything like that. So, like, a really, really dark purple, Nagaroth Knight, that's also really, really dark. Leviathan purple is very nice. Shaiish purple, very different, but also very dark. Mixing up some purple, that can work. Yeah, that's a tricky one. It's a tricky one because, like I said, it's a piece of artwork. And I to me, it looks pink. And you said dark purple. I'm like, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing black with pink trim, not purple. Do you see what I mean? Can you demonstrate what happens if the contrast paint pot is not shaken up enough or properly? Again, the cop-out answer is no, because mine are used all the time. So they're always shaken all the time. If you see what I mean. I can't remember which ones I haven't used for a while. That would be a decent example. Like if you asked me about something like, well, like this this pot of iron rack skin, for example, right? So you can see that one's separated there. I haven't used it. I haven't touched this in a while. You see what I mean? There you go. Anyway, yeah. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. When I go back and look through this footage, I'll be able to see at the point where I was derailed by someone who was mad at me for doing it. So that's fun. So yeah, I'm gonna try and not let that get under my skin. For the rest of the week. I'm gonna try my best. But there we go. No, I know, but it's like just when somebody turns up and calls you calls what you're doing garbage, it's pretty hard to shake that sometimes. Do you know what I mean? It's just one of those things that sticks in the craw for a little while, and you're just like, oh fuck. Do you see what I mean? It's just, yeah. Like, I get it with my comment section as well sometimes. There's a lot of very, very positive comments, and every so often one just comes along where they'll just be like, this isn't a comment on you at all, but what you've done here is utter rubbish, and I think you should be ashamed for sharing this with people because you're leading people down a dangerous path of doing the wrong thing. Why would anyone want to ruin a model this way? And you're like, so that's entirely a comment on me. So thanks. And it's like, what did I do to you? I didn't do anything to you other than try and help. But, you know, so it's hard sometimes. And every so often, just one sticks in there like a little splinter, you know, just gets in there. And you're like, ah, God damn it. Why is this one bothering me? And then, James, thank you so much for the $100 dono. That's amazing. Thank you so much. Don't let God get to you. This was fantastic. He's just sad. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind. They want a 30-second TikTok. Yes, they do. That is what they want. But there you go. Just know you're a hero on my end. Thank you, Gothic. That's very kind. Shaking paint rack should exist, like those Ubers. Just a motorized, the motorized. James, that's very generous of you. Thank you very much. I've been following your vids for about a month, and my army is looking sick. So thanks. It's very kind of you. Super awesome. My entire Blood Digital army has been painted using your videos. This is what I mean. You guys are very generous and very nice and very kind and very lovely, and you are what I focus on most of the time. And every so often there is an outlier. It's very rare that they come and make themselves known in chat, but it does occasionally happen. And it's like, whoa! But there you go. I'm not sure I can cope with painting an EC army, but might do a Legionaries Kill Team kit bash with the basic EC troops. I want to paint them in such a garish neon pink, it's offensive. Love it. Never change. Oh dear. What did it take for a Yin Khan video? You are amazing. It would take me having the time and the money to do it, and I don't have either of those at the moment. And I need to buy the. That's why I need to buy the model. Basically, at the moment I just flat don't have the time. Maybe we will have it a little bit later. I'm not sure. But it's on the list of things to do. Don't worry, it's there. It's on the to-do list. I vote with my wallet. When I am sad, I talk to my friends. Kindness is given to me, so I extend kindness into the world when I can. You are a wonderful teacher in entertainment. You're a wonderful person, James. And I very much appreciate you. You put a lot of kindness into the world. And that's because you're a very kind person. You're a very wonderful person. Thank you so much. Do you still do coaching through Patreon? Yes, I do. At the top level, you can get an hour's coaching with me. There you go. This is what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'm going to go. I'm going to go and do something else. Is that an email? It is. It is, James. It is indeed. There you go. Anyway, let's go and do something else for a change, shall we? Yeah. See you later, I guess. How is that censorship? I put him in timeout to begin with, and then he couldn't chat, so he came back with another thing to yell about censorship. Yeah. It's going to ruin us. So there you go. Anyway, I will see you all very soon in the next one. Tomorrow there will be a video. Maybe it'll be this one. Maybe I'll turn this into a video tomorrow. Or I'll do it in a couple of weeks' time. I haven't quite decided yet. It depends on the time it takes for us to do it. But there will be some painting videos, which I have been making. The things I make all the time, all day, every day. Paint a video tomorrow, and there will be a video on Friday, and then there will be a video on Saturday as well. So I will see you all very soon in the next one. Love you, chat. Don't worry, we'll never stop streaming. Bye for now. Josh can ban whoever he wants from his channel. Yeah, I can, because it's not a public forum. I'm allowed to moderate my own channel. Who'd have thought? Anyway, I will see you all very soon in the next one. I'm going to go. Bye for now, everybody. Love you, chat. Love everybody else. Apart from that guy. Love you guys. Bye for now. Bye, 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 bye.